Y'all ready to learn about the Mothbox? Woo! Okay, cool. If you've seen other presentations, you might be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna see photos and stuff. This is gonna be an Andy presentation where it goes fast. There's gonna be things you're gonna be like, wait, that's a weird image, I have questions. Like, just let it wash over you. We'll get to try to make sense of things later. So just have the presentation more as a feeling. So anyway, I want to talk to you about the Mothbox today. What is this thing? It's a box, first of all, and it does some stuff. It attracts insects, it photographs them, so it turns on a big light, lures in bugs, takes photos of them, and then it works to automatically identify all these cool bugs. The best thing about it, you can build it yourself. Is this true? Are there people who built it themselves just yesterday and today in this room? There are, yes, amazing. So you can build it yourself. So a little bit of background. Hey, I'm Andy. I used to be Michael's student. This is me with an ant sensor in my mouth in Madagascar, sensing some ant traffic going up and down a tree. It zaps my tongue. I was a PhD student here who studied how field biologists use tools in the jungle. I did some other things. We had a local Atlanta business where we did other types of interactions with people. Eventually got tricked into a very silly TV show that was supposed to be about me helping scientists. When I showed up and after I signed the contracts, they go, psych, it's a survival show, but you always have a laptop. It was confusing and weird, but I had a weird show, and yeah, I would make strange things, so let's continue. Now, me and my partner, Kitty, along with some of our friends like Lupe the Agouti or Valencia the Tapir, we hang out in Panama. And so here's Panama. And we run a thing called Digital Naturalism Laboratories. This is where we kind of study how we can use art and technology for interacting with nature and trying to do this as much as possible in the wild. And when I say the wild, some people from HCI and stuff, they might be like, oh, that means they're gonna use it in a shopping mall, or like someone's gonna use it in their living room. No, we mean like places where humans do not have much control over their environment. And so other living things tend to have more control over that. So we mean kind of by in the wild. We call it Dynalab because it's shorter. It's a little solar-powered workshop. It's located in a very strange town called Gamboa, which is right on the Panama Canal and right next to the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. We have prototyping facilities, laser cutters, 3D printers, and we do pretty much all of our own upcycling. So we collect trash from around the neighborhood and from the scientists, and we have extruders and shredders. We do our own 3D printing out of plastic bottles. So lots of different prototyping materials. We try to use as much upcycled material as possible. We also run lots of art and science events. So I teach field courses around the world, teaching scientists how to use interactive technology. That was in Costa Rica. I teach design courses for like designers and engineers where I make them go outside and play with pine cones and stuff like that. And we also run big conferences. So one conference that it's open for applications right now is called DynaCon, the Digital Naturalism Conference. We had one in Thailand, Panama, Sri Lanka, and upcoming, the outskirts of Bali, Indonesia, in July 2025. You can apply right now. What is this mysterious conference you're talking about? Oh, I don't have a slide for that, but I'll tell you right now. It's a fun conference where we get biologists, artists, engineers, all together into a place, and we build and work on things together. The only rules for DynaCon is you have to do something, you have to publicly share it, and then you have to get 2 other people at DynaCon to review your thing that you made. And we always work with a local partner. The local partner this year is a group called Sea Communities, which does coral restoration work and these nice little bungalows right on the sea. It's gonna be very nice. There's also a recycling facility nearby and an organic salt farming facility and a bunch of other community groups that will be working and doing fun stuff while we build kind of outdoor maker spaces. So if that sounds interesting to you, just look up DynaCon or message me. I'll have all kinds of stuff. DynaCon's kind of a weird conference. It runs for like 5 to 6 weeks, so you can drop in and out. It can even overlap other conferences. For instance, another conference called the Gathering for Open Science Hardware, which will also likely be in Bali towards the end of July 2025. So you can go to 2 conferences in one. And this one is all about people from around the world who build open science hardware. Me and Bree right there, we actually ran GOSH 2022 in Panama, and we got all these fun people together, and it was really great. And the common link between all these things is, again, trying to bring field biologists, engineers, and artists all together to try to find ways for interacting with nature. This is a robot that climbs trees. More questions? Don't got time for it right now. Let it wash over you. But that's something some people made one day during DynaCon. And the key thing about all this is, again, at DynaLab, at DynaCon, we are looking how to design tools for interacting with nature. So we've done lots of different things. We've done things like animal enrichment. This is us. I was teaching a class at the Singapore Zoo. My students were trying to make like an interactive tic-tac-toe thing for the red panda. Red panda did not want to play tic-tac-toe. But a more effective enrichment project was probably this thing for a sun bear. Sun bears are really smart, and they always really want to like forage and like keep their brain really active, and they're always looking for stuff. This is basically a capacitive touch tongue sensor that then feeds to a set of peristaltic pumps that squirt honey in different tubes where their tongue isn't. So the bear will lick over here, and then it'll squirt honey over here, and it's like, and it has to go there, and then it'll keep squirting honey. So it always has to kind of forage around looking for new places to find honey. This is my other friend, Valencia. She's a tapir with behavioral problems who gets really grumpy if she gets bored, so we make her fun little interactive toys. But a lot of this all got started interacting with creatures and stuff at Georgia Tech. I worked in a robotics lab, also helped during my PhD, trying to see what ants were up to, see if Sally's talking to Susie at the watering hole, for how long. And we've worked on a bunch of other types of open source tools for field biologists, like 360-degree camera traps. This was a device for testing butterfly arm strength for Owen McMillan's lab. For some reason, they want to know how strong their butterflies are. This is a camera trap for fishing bats. And so it had to be a camera trap that also floated, and then the camera's on like a little gimbal, but then also it had to look kind of like garbage because they kept getting stolen. It was a fun, unique design challenge. And that's kind of the reason why I do a lot of my work with field biologists, is because field biologists have unending, strange problems to work on. This was another one. My friend Denise, who works on these heliconius butterflies, she found out she could trick regular like deer camera traps to actually detect butterflies. And when she told me that, there's a lot of scientists who are like, oh, I'm going to use this camera trap, that's usually used for like jaguars or whatever, but I'm going to set it up so that like every time these ants walk by, it'll take a photo. And I'm like, no, the sensor is not sensitive enough. It's not going to pick up ants. And so Denise told me like, yeah, I'm going to use this for butterflies. I'm like, Denise, that's not going to work. And she's like, no, it works. My photos just come out really blurry. And so that's because the camera lens is made for a focal distance, a set focal distance a little bit further away. And it works apparently because the wings are able to reflect enough IR light to actually trigger the IR motion detector on the camera traps. So her main problem was she has the sensor working, but it's just super blurry. And so then I just found some cheap dollar store reading glasses, cut them in half, and now we have off-the-shelf camera traps that help you do that stuff. And now they're using it for tracking butterflies going to different flowers. Importantly, everything we do is open source. If it's not an open source tool, you can't actually do science with it. Just putting that out there. And let's speak about a cool open source tool that we're working on right now. It's called the Mothbox. So we have a fun team that keeps growing. We have folks like Yash right here. We got Bree is our cool incoming Fulbright student who's going to be working on this. Basically starting tomorrow, we go to Panama at 6 in the morning. And here's a little bit of background. Why are we looking at moths? Where are we? So take a little breather. We're going to go to Panama now, okay? So here's the background. Panama is a really skinny country, and it's got this little dangly bit there. That little dangly bit is called the Azuero Peninsula. And a lot of colonial entities, when they came to Panama, they were like, hey, you know what we really want? Hamburgers. So, hey, all y'all, there's a bunch of forest here. We don't want that. We want hamburgers. So please chop down all the forest. So this whole area, this whole dangly thing coming out, where's my mouth? There we go. This got all chopped down. When you go there, you don't even know it used to be rainforest. It feels kind of like California. It's actually drier. There's lots of grasslands everywhere. It's very strange, even though it used to be rainforest 80 years ago. And so people chopped it down. The problem is, before it was forest, later it turned into beef places. But shortly after it turned into a beef supplying zone, the ground lost all of its nutrients. So you can't even really grow grass and stuff that the cattle are eating that much anymore. The land is so degraded that banks in the past 10 years won't even give you loans to do farming there anymore. So all the farmers are kind of like, oh, this super sucks now. And what really sucks for is all the animals that used to live in that forest, now they live in like a burnt out wasteland. So here's a picture from Hubert, our biologist buddy in the jungle, of a little baby riding at its mom trying to escape out of this place. A nice thing is there's cool, nice groups that are trying to reforest these areas. So they're growing native plants, native trees, and they're doing an amazing job actually reforesting this and slowly actually changing the climate back of the whole Azuero Peninsula, which is really impressive, and it's a huge project that's happening. And there's now even lots of money flowing into this area because people want carbon credits. So Microsoft's like, here's $30 million to greenwash my image. Please put a bunch of trees here. What's nice is this money is actually going to a lot of actually nice local groups. And the people planting the trees are actually doing a good job. There's a lot of carbon credit kind of things where it's basically a scam. They'll grow monocultures, they grow non-native trees. They just put stuff in the soil that they can harvest in 40 years instead of actually rebuilding the forest. It's actually about 94% of reforesting things are just monocultures. So they're not actually making forests, they're making tree farms. And so when something big is happening to the environment, sometimes some scientists are like, psh, I want to go see what's going on here. What's happening? So enter some scientists like Daisy Dent, a really cool tropical ecologist, and her student Hubert Stigl. And Hubert is kind of in charge of seeing what happens when you do all this reforesting. And is one type of reforesting better than another type? What about just leaving the land? What happens to that versus putting in these trees or these other kinds of trees? So Hubert's going all over the place, using a bunch of traditional ways of studying the environment, which is fun that we can call like camera trapping is now a traditional way of studying the environment. But doing other things like doing acoustic assays with like audio moss, soil samples, water samples, basically trying to get as much data from these patches of land that were farms, but now they're forests, or nearby primary forests that stayed intact, and how do you compare all of these different things? Which brings us to the question like, why do you want to study moths? You got camera traps. We want to know if there's like a jaguar there, right? If there's a jaguar there, it's jungle. If there's not, it's not, right? But no, it's a little more subtle than that. So first reason you might want to bring bugs into this kind of study of biodiversity is that insects are hyper diverse. So There's 2 million things that humans have given scientific names to. So since like Western science began, and we're just like, oh, that's a frog. But it's not just any frog, it's like this type of frog. And so we did that like 2 million times so far. There's lots of things we haven't yet named yet. But of those 2 million things that we've given names to, half of those things are insects. So 1 million things are like, that's a bug. This includes like all the funguses that we've looked at, bacteria that we looked at. Half of these things are still insects. And again, 1 out of every 5 things, if you put all those 2 million names into a hat, every 5th one that you pulled out would be a beetle. And 1 in 14 is moths, which is super bonkers. So there's these are way hyper specious for some reason. But what's cool about that is that if you use your insects as a sensor, this means them as a sensor is kind of a higher resolution sensor, right? This is compared to like, there's only about 6,500 species of mammals. So you had to reach in that hat 330 times to like find a monkey or something like that. So sorry if we see the monkey, we might be like, okay, it was kind of cool. This monkey came through our data site, right? But if that monkey was one of like 150,000 different types of monkeys, we'd be like, oh, it's this ultra specific monkey. And so we totally know what's going on there. Another cool thing about insects is they can be really hyper localized. So some species are only found in like one area. And some caterpillars are even host specific, meaning that they only eat one type of plant. So if you see this caterpillar showed up here, like let's say maybe this butterfly showed up here, you might know like, oh, there's passion fruit nearby because that butterfly only eats this certain type of passion fruit. So you can use that as a proxy for local plants. This means that you can even we've had moth boxes that were installed maybe like that side of the building versus that side of the building, maybe 100 meters apart, and you might see totally different things that live there. Why don't you want to be big anymore? You can be big. Go back to being big. Okay. Give the presentation 1 second. Dun, dun, dun. There we go. These bugs can be super localized. Now compare this again to our poor monkey. It's cool there's lots of other data that you can get about seeing a monkey on a camera trap, especially a monkey that wasn't sighted in this area for like the past 80 years because everybody burned stuff down. So that's cool. But one thing you don't really know is like a very naive approach would be like, hey, I have a burnt out farm. We saw a picture of a monkey there. Monkeys live in burnt out farms. But a less naive approach would be like, oh, this monkey's probably passing maybe from one forest area to another and just making its way across this. So a lot of mammals and other things, they can cross big areas, and their spatial resolution, if you use them as a sensor, is much lower, right? If that makes sense. Finally, a cool thing about working with insects, we've hacked their system. If you want to know why moths seem attracted to a light, you could actually talk to an expert on this who published a paper this past year that you can read about in fancy publications about how it jams their navigation and stuff like that. That's Yash right here. So we figured out like, hey, big bright light confuses them. They need to hang out on something flat for a while and chill out. So they're easy to attract. The monkey failed to come to the big bright light. So again, so another +1. Sorry, I feel like I'm picking on this poor monkey. Despite this though, insects and moths and these nocturnal insects, it's still really hard. Even if we figured out how to jam these things, a traditional way of studying these insects, you hang up a big sheet at night, you get a really big bright light, but then you have to hang out there all night, and you have to write down like, oh, okay, yeah, moth came. And you'd be like, oh yeah, another moth came. Oh, beetle came, okay? This is fun, but it can get old if you have to do that like every night, and it doesn't scale well, right? If you want to test like the bottom of this mountain versus the top of the mountain, you want to do them at the same time, but that means you need 2 different teams, each doing it, each setting up their sheet, writing down all this data. So there's got to be a better way. So when Hubert was starting his biodiversity monitoring project, he was like, I don't want to have like 12 of me have to like sit at these things all night. There's got to be a better, cool way, right? So there's a paper by Bjerg et al. And that they released in like 2021, I think. And it was about just building a proof of concept automated moth monitor. So it's a Raspberry Pi hooked up to a camera, turns on a light, bugs come, take photos of it. It's great. So we're like, let's use that. So then we started looking around. There's existing automated moth detectors, but there's a couple problems with them. One, pricey. Hubert's entire research budget for him and like 20 people he's working with is about $10,000 for a summer. So this is less than the cost of some of these existing automated moth monitoring devices. The other downside is they're kind of closed source, or some are even, they're open, but it's actually hard to find the information about how to use them or how to build them yourself. So it's a little not great. Another problem that we found is that a lot of them are very low resolution. Most of them use just like a webcam that has between 8 to 16 megapixel resolution. And the other big problem for Hubert in going out into the wild and really kind of rough areas that aren't that friendly to humans is a lot of these moth monitoring things are huge. So they're like the size of maybe this table. They're like a big pelican case. So if you want to carry one through the jungle and up a mountain, it's going to be quite an ordeal. So we're like, forget this, we're going to build our own. So this is the first Mothbox. It's some Tupperware with some electronics shoved into it. We rapidly started developing on it, trying to shrink it, make it more portable, make it more reliable, make it super weatherproof. And we do tons of iterative field testing. And this is really important for anyone who's ever built something. Try the thing out where it's going to be used as often as possible, because you're going to learn how much you assumed all kinds of incorrect stuff, and you're going to learn all kinds of magical ways that your thing can break and fail. So we do a bunch of that. The other thing that can be hard to do and is terrifying to do as any kind of engineer or designer is community testing. Giving it to people who aren't you and being like, hey, use this to go monitor moths. Because as soon as they pick it up, they do things like they put it upside down, or they flip off the switch that has a big taped thing that says, do not switch off. And so these are like things that you as the designer are like, why would anyone ever do that? But that's what people do, and you have to design it for them, right? So that's a huge learning experience and super valuable, and has really helped our designing. And even in doing like the workshops we did yesterday and today, I have a whole list of notes for how to streamline these processes. We've gotten a couple grants. We've gotten a really nice big one from Wild Labs that has funded us this whole past year. We got $60K, but still the entire budget for probably this entire project over the past year and a half, 2 years, has been about like, I don't know, 80, 90K. So like the cost of like, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the really expensive moth monitors. And that includes all the field assistants, the cost for like the 30 moth boxes that are been made and are kind of out in the wild in different places. We're up to version 4 now. Version 5, we have no current funding. We're out of money, basically November 1st. If anyone has like 50, 60K and they want to see more Mothbox development in the wild, what could V5 hold? Give us money, that'll be great. But let me tell you about version 4 right now. How do you use this thing? It looks complicated, right? There's lights, there's bugs. It's not that complicated. The main thing that you do is you hang it on a tree, or a tripod if you're in like a treeless kind of area. So you just hang it up on something, and then you leave it. It runs automatically. It has a built-in internal schedule, and it just turns on, starts luring in bugs, and taking photos of it. So you just let it go. You don't actually have to program this thing either. You can just edit a little CSV file that you give to it via USB stick, and you can change all the settings for it. You can change the camera settings. You can change what hours it turns on, what days it turns on, if it only needs to turn on every other new moon or something like that. Then you go back after a couple days, you pick it up, you download all the photos, and your photos tend to look like this. So you got a big white target with a bunch of bugs all over them. Then we made some special softwares. We're using, I don't know if you heard about it, AI. And so we use magical AI things. A fun thing, though, is because we're super restricted and limited by how we can use AI stuff, because a lot of the people using this are out where there's places where there's not much internet. So everything, all of our AI processing runs locally. You can run it on a $600 laptop locally. You don't need to feed it online to a big supercomputer that uses a ton of energy and crunches through this. You can basically leave your computer on for like, I can process a whole night's worth of 300 photos in about 45 minutes, hour and a half sometimes. So just leave that on. It goes and gets all the IDs. Oh yeah, what up, man? And so it does that. And if you're a computer scientist, you go, job's done. I told you that this thing was a Lepidoptera and that thing was something else. My robots told you the exact right answers. If you're a biologist, you might be like, yeah, maybe some of those are wrong. So importantly, we keep humans in the loop. So we make there's a little visual interface. We're using a thing called 51, which helps you get kind of a UI to then go and correct some of these labels that might happen. And what's cool is the thing that does the IDing is an AI thing called BioClip, which is an open source AI model that tries to identify creatures based on all this data that it's trained on from like iNaturalist and stuff like that. What's really cool about this identification thing, in my view, is not as much that it is super good at IDing stuff, though it is. It's actually like, it gets about like 90% of our things right, at least to the order level. But a cool thing is that the things that it gets wrong pretty consistently. So it might say that this butterfly is a flea, but it always says this specific butterfly is this kind of flea. And so then you can go in like a user interface and be like, oh, all these ones that it said with this flea, like most of those are actually this family or something like that. So it's really important to keep people in there. And then what we do is this data gets morphed into big CSV files that are set up for things like adding this data to GBIF, which if you don't know what GBIF is, it stands for something. What does GBIF stand for, biologists? Global Biodiversity Information Facility. Thank you, exactly. So it's like a big cool place where there's all this there's bug information. There's also birds and stuff. Pretty much, it's mostly birds? Ah, wow. So you can submit this data there and use it and share it openly. But the fun doesn't stop there. Yeah, you can contribute to science, but what about contributing to moths as an overall lifestyle? You can make visualizations. I've made extra scripts for doing different kinds of data sharing. You can see I made a script where you can take each night of your data and you can print out a 100% zine, so you can kind of feel like, oh, this is how many bugs we got last night. And you're like, oh, what kind of bug? Oh, we got look at that one, that's weird. Oh, this one was really big, that kind of stuff. And so there's other ways to kind of share and engage with this data that can activate different things within you. We'll even be having a fundraiser soon where you can get super cool data sets turned into wearable fashion. You'll be able to get bikinis, hats, they even sell shoes that'll all be different data sets. So keep an eye out for that. All the profits will go towards more mothboxing. For people who want to know the nitty-gritty, you got this Mothbox, right? What's going on with it? What are the key facts? I'm going to go through some of this pretty quick. But we got a 64 megapixel camera. This we find really important to have this extra layer of really high resolution imagery, because going from like the 16 megapixel camera, we can usually tell like, yeah, it's a moth. But having the 64 megapixel camera can help us identify deeper taxonomic levels. For instance, it can also get really tiny bugs. Hubert this was like a week ago, found this photo. This is a bug that's maybe like 1.5 millimeters wide. He was able to ID it down to the species level, which is super cool for a little tiny bug. The Mothbox has its own internal battery. We've tested it running for about 20 hours or so, which in our normal schedule gives it about 4 nights of running. We usually run it about 5 hours a night, basically every other hour. But a cool thing is we designed it so it can use different hybrid power. So you can plug in solar panels. You can plug in other batteries. You can actually daisy chain the batteries together. So if your Mothbox runs for 4 nights, but you want it to run for 8 nights, you just pop another battery in there. It's generally kind of all 12-volt based with the power regulator. And so you can get like a big car battery if you want, hook it up to that, supply it with that. It'll take care of the power. You can hook it up to continuous DC power. There's a lot of different options. It's weatherproofed. We've done a lot of iterations. It's hung out and got rained on a bunch. Probably don't use it underwater. Usually there's some like marine scientist who's like, this is great, I'm gonna get one, we're gonna put it in a coral reef. I'm like, that's great. There's some more things we need to do to make it actually go all the way underwater, but really not that much. If we can get this thing in just like a fully submersible housing, it can definitely be tweaked for that, which is cool. One of my favorite things is this thing is kind of tiny. It occurred to me, we have like 8 of these upstairs. We really should have brought one down. But you'll see lots of photos of them. But they're just a little box. And you walk around with them. It looks cute. It's like you got a little lunch box, but you're going to see moths. So this pack on the right here, this pelican case, the yellow one, is the largest size for a standard overhead bin size. So I went to Ecuador, and I was able to carry 4 Mothboxes with me and just pop it. I didn't even have to check a bag, right? This means I also put backpack straps on this pelican case, so then I could hike out into the forest with it and then deploy, which is fun. But again, these things aren't that expensive. Welcome, Jeanette. Hi. They're small, and they're not that heavy. You can use different size targets on it. We've had deployments in Panama, Peru, Ecuador, and they've been built by lots of different people. So different scientists have built them already around the world. Non-specialist people have built them. We even had a group in Rhode Island working at the library who were doing a Mothbox build with some kids, which is super fun. And you can build your own yourself. A lot of you folks might be interested in design, so I included some things about why we designed some of the things that we did. And so everything's designed in the field for the field. Big reason for that is we have digital technology. And a lot of field biologists might have this feeling like, boy, wow, I heard they had this awesome ant tracking that they did at Georgia Tech that totally worked 100% of the time in the lab. And then when we went to Panama, oh, it did not work. And then maybe when you met up with the computer science people who were tracking your ants, their response was like, well, yeah, your ants are on a circle tree. It needs to be flat. And you're like, but my ants live on a tree. They go, sorry, you got to put them in a flat space. So that kind of bummed me out when I was the person who had to keep giving this excuse, being like, sorry, trees are bad, lab is cool. So I wanted things that worked in the field, right? So we really tried to design this thing so you could take it to the field. It can handle all the chaos and non-control that we have out of there. And if stuff breaks, you can fix it. There's no soldering involved in the whole thing. It uses all lever nuts. If something breaks in your Mothbox, you can probably fix 95% of the problems with a knife and maybe like a hot glue stick if you need. I usually have a knife and like a lighter and a hot glue stick, and I can just melt stuff into place if need be. All the parts, we make a lot of the parts are redundant. So all the arms that hold the Mothbox out, they're actually 2 arms. So if you drop your Mothbox down a cliff and one of the arms snaps or something like that, your other arm is actually another set of arms. So you can use that. So the lights themselves are doubled and can be centered. Oh, nice. We got a Mothbox right here. Beautiful. For people interested in like rapid prototyping design, I gotta preach the gospel of like flat pack design. If you can make your thing designed for 2D stuff, then you can always go back to 3D stuff, right? My thing can be laser cut from a piece of acrylic about this big in, I don't know, 15 minutes. Cut all those parts? Yeah, something like 15, 20 minutes. But if you don't got a laser cutter, you only got your Creality Ender, that's cool because you can also 3D print all these files too. They just need to be 3 millimeters thick. Worst case scenario, you can even print out these 2D designs, get a Dremel, and like cut the stuff out yourself. So if you're stuck somewhere and you really need a new target or something like that, you can print this out and get something that's the right dimensions. It might be a little wonky, but you can do it. We built it openly, which is really important. That means that while we were building it, we didn't go around talking to the other scientists being like, I'm working on this real cool thing, but you can't tell anyone about it. Instead, the whole time we were like, hey, I'm working on this thing. It's actually really hard. Has anybody done this? Can anybody help me? Okay, people haven't done this yet. Okay, I'm gonna do this. And then like, okay, everybody, I did this. Here's this thing that everybody can do now, and we don't have to repeat this work. It's much more efficient, saves everybody's time and energy. Work with 2 really cool groups that I'm on kind of like the board of council folks with at different times. The Open Source Hardware Association. Shout out to them. They're really cool. They're having a conference, Open Hardware Summit in May in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the GOSH, we've already talked about them a little bit, the Gathering for Open Science Hardware, a big kind of anarchist punk network of people working together to build scientific tools all over the world. Bree used to be the amazing community manager of GOSH. It's a really cool forum. If you have a question where you're like, I want these bugs, but I want to know how strong their arms are, for instance. You could post a question on there, and then there's a bunch of like fun nerds who will be like, oh, I've always wanted to use this strength tester on something that's like a bug. Oh, cool bug. That's really beautiful.
Show you my bug.
Thanks, Jeanette. Encouraging everyone, if you're working on something, publicly document it. You can share it on forums like this, share it on forums like Wild Labs. Other people will give you advice, will help you along. And even if they don't, it helps you reflect on your own process. And also, when you're like 10 months into a project and everything breaks and you're like, wait, how did I even do that? You can go back and look at all your notes and unmess up your own mind. Why is it open source? Everything we do is open source. If it's not open, it's not science. I'm just saying this again because it's really important. Everyone can build and remix all these tools freely. This is important. The whole point of science is that someone who's not you can also do the same thing, and they also get the same results. If they can't do the same thing, or you go, you can do the same thing, but you got to use my special mystery box that gives you special mystery data. And if your mystery data says the same thing as mine, it must be true. That's not actually science. Another important reason for this, it's more equitable to have open scientific tools. If you're like, hey, you can do this science too, but you have to get this license for this special software that costs $100K. People who aren't you, who might be from different socioeconomic world backgrounds than you, also can't do this. So they can't replicate it. So again, it's not science. Another cool reason to do this is it makes your thing more powerful. If, let's say, there's like a whole bunch of different things that are trying to do moth detecting in the world, but only certain people can access some of these moth detectors, but everyone can access another moth detector, you expand how many more people can contribute to all of this data. So that's pretty cool. Another important reason, it's self-correcting. You screw something up, you add some kind of error to your programming. If other people can see this, they can catch it and help improve the commons for everyone. There's a whole bunch of reasons for making open source everything. Check it all out, visit Gosh. But another thing that I find very important and very worrying, this is what keeps me up at night, is trying to think about, we have a responsibility adding these new tools. How can we make sure this tool doesn't lead to the enshittification of conservation stuff, right? A lot of people heard of Goodhart's law, right? Whenever you have a measure that becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. People are like, oh, you know what? Too much carbon in the air. We got to put the carbon somewhere else. And then people go, oh, this is great. I'm going to grow a teak farm and chop it down in 30 years. So it's not great. People heard about, there's lots of scams that have come up because of things like carbon credits. There's another thing that's impending that scares the hell out of me. And that's a thing called biodiversity credits. Who's heard of this? Okay. Yeah, nice. So there's a thing that in the conservation world, and more importantly in the conservation economic trading world that wants to do things like trading carbon credits, they're like, oh, these biodiversity credits are coming up. What are they? Nobody knows. It's just kind of this thing people are like, biodiversity credits are coming. Nobody's decided what a biodiversity credit is, but people have already started trying to hedge bets on being like, oh, we're gonna get the most biodiversity credits. We don't know what they are. But the problem is, as soon as you come up with a metric, people are gonna start trying to game this metric. Does everybody know the cobra example, right? You're like, hey, there's too many cobras biting everyone. So we're gonna have a reward. I'll give you $10 for every cobra you kill. An unintended effect is instead of reducing the cobra population, which I don't want to do anyway, but just for the sake of this example, people start farming cobras and releasing them into the wild, right? So you can imagine there's going to be a bunch of different ways, whatever they decide a biodiversity credit is. Maybe you're like, the more species in an area, the more valuable it is. That could be cool. That seems nice, right? So it can be a well-intentioned thing. More species is cool, right? But then maybe you go somewhere like the Galapagos and you're like, I want more species here because that's better. And so here's some goats. I brought a bunch of other species over. So this the Galapagos is famously non-biodiverse. There's very few things, but each of those things is very special. But depending on how we create these metrics, it could really lead to screwing things up. And so this leads me to talking about responsibility and research responsibility. Oftentimes I talk to field biologists, but this is true in many fields. And I want to kind of talk about extractivism. Extractivism is the key feature of basically colonialism. This is a giant mine, an illegal mine that opened up. It's 3 times the size of Manhattan. That is just an open pit obliteration of the rainforest in Panama. This is in Panama, yeah. Here's a poor tapir that got stuck on this. So everyone can very easily see the metaphor of extractivism when you think of something like a mine, right? Outside individuals, it's a Canadian mining company, come down, bribe people, illegally open this mine. This is a $8 billion a year mine or something like that. it's completely illegal. It was never legal. And they literally are extracting gold and copper from this area. And this is none of these profits, very little of these profits are going to the local area surrounding it. And in fact, it's leaving it kind of worse off than it was. A problem is a lot of Western science, a lot of Western research can also function this way. Who's heard of the term parachute scientists? So this is where Alex Trio, a really cool scientist. Anyone know Alex? Does frogs and stuff? Anyway, super cool. Made this great juxtaposition in one of her talks. Up here, we see this is amphibian species. So this is kind of like biodiversity. You see a map where places that are much more biodiverse are really expanded. Look at how big, like, Central and South America are there, like super biodiverse. And then if you look at, in corollary, is if you look at where all that information about those gets published, gets shared, it's all Western countries, US and Europe, and very little of this scientific gold, this scientific information is actually being shared back or published with the people who are actually from these areas. So you can kind of see this information extractivism happening in real time.
Ain't that homunculus?
This homunculus? This is Pan et al. And this one's from Wake and Vredenburg.
Okay.
Yeah. If you look up either of those on Scholar, you can see the whole papers about them. So yeah, I'm just gonna say scientific knowledge and like research knowledge, anything you're publishing, it has real value. But you need to make sure that even if you're not doing like with foreign things, if you're working with communities or ecosystems, make sure that you're not just extracting and locking away this value for your own, or for that of institutions that are using you. And instead, make sure that you're able to share this information back. And just again, pointing out, your task in life is not to increase the H-index of yourself or an institution. Your goal, you gotta find things and share them with the world. That's one of the best things to do. You're all gonna die someday. And screw that. Like, have something that other people can benefit from with after you're gone. So you got a responsibility. Fight this extraction, just like the tapir fighting that horrible mine. Problem though, things are really tough and complicated, right? Like, oh, if I do this, it's gonna suck. If I do this, what do I do? My main advice, when things are tough and complicated, don't strive for purity. You'll drive yourself nuts trying to do everything absolutely perfect, but you gotta do something. Do something that's helping out people, that's helping out things that you're working with. Just find ways to not necessarily be perfect, find ways to kind of reduce harm and help out other people. Some advice, you could mentor local other researchers. You can do, like, if you're in a place where you maybe don't speak the language, participate in language exchanges, share your cultures and learn about other people's cultures. Hold people who are in power, hold them accountable for the things they're promising, hold them accountable for things that they do that might not be great. And even just like host a de-stressing event. Take other people who are working and doing nice things, have a craft night for them. Do something fun. Try to make the world a little bit nicer. And most importantly, document and share your work publicly. Again, none of you are immortal, but your words and your concepts can be. And so that's me. I'm Andy. I'm here until 4:30 a.m. tomorrow, and me and Bree are leaving. And I'm very reachable. Our Instagram has a lot of, we also work at an animal rescue, so lots of sloth pictures. So just selling that right there. But you can also learn about the Mothbox right there. And you can email me. You can Google search me, and you're gonna learn other things about me, which will be fun. But you can find my email and stuff very easily. Yeah, and that's it. Questions? What's that?
Well, it's happening right now. It's the biggest biodiversity summit in Colombia.
Uh-huh.
And they do weigh finances versus nature.
They do weigh finances versus nature.
Yeah, I want you to come and help me look it over because I like what you're saying.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. I don't have, if you ask me personally about things that happen at things like COP16, I think it's a lot of greenwashing going on, and I think it's a lot of economic calculations that devalue whole ecosystems by putting very basic, not well thought out numbers on.
Listen to it, and I just was listening. I was like, oh my God, how is this real?
Yeah. No, I have lots of friends out there and who are like, yeah, documenting it and sharing COP16 right now. For instance, my one friend Joe was talking about some things he's seeing there, live right now. Is institutions like the military are talking about how much biodiversity they save by fighting those migrants who are like leaving candy bar wrappers around the forest. Meanwhile, you have things like the U.S. military is one of the by far largest polluters in the entire world. And so there's a lot of picking and choosing and trying to greenwash your image that I've seen go on at COP16. Haven't been there myself. And there are lots of very good groups that are going there. There's lots of, I'm sure, lots of well-intentions that happen there, but it seems messy at best. Yeah.
No, but it's like all of the world is looking at this in a way, and you're just saying, hoping that they will do the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's got to be, I mean, they all sounded pretty smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Mothbox currently relies on light to attract moths. Have you tried building moth boxes that do like smell versions or I don't know whatever else pheromone based?
Totally. So one thing that we've had in the works for a while, a nice thing about the Mothbox is it's just kind of a platform for having a pretty weatherproof thing in a small container that can do stuff that you program it to according to a schedule. So we have a friend, Sol, who's been wanting to do something with, I think, daytime moths. And where she has a little, we'd have like a little vial of some little container of some kind of like pheromone or attractant. And we'd hook that up to a little peristaltic pump. And we even have, there's a third relay open in the Mothbox for just custom whatever you want. And so we're gonna hook that up to then like, every hour it'll, instead of turning on a big light, it'll like squirt a little juice onto the target and then like try to see what gets attracted to that. So we really want it to be kind of an open experimentation platform.
So I have a question that's kind of similar to that
Yeah.
previous question, but so like as you know, like a lot of insects come to lights, but some of them will not land on a vertical sheet, right? Have you tried this to look for beetles and other things that aquatic beetles and things that might just land on the ground by tilting the Mothbox 90 degrees down?
No, I never have. And that's really cool because there's a guy from Michigan who studies, he said, aquatic insects that like emerge near rivers or something like that. And he said he wanted to use a Mothbox, but I didn't know that maybe some of these things don't fly. So that'd be cool. Just, lay that part on the ground and have it kind of standing up. No, I've never tried that, but that's a super cool idea. Yeah.
I can see doing long legs on one too for water if they're aquatic, like water surface creatures. So it's like Mothbox, platform, legs, stick it in like a riverbed. Could you do fish?
I guess. You might run into imaging problems with going through that water surface. Yeah.
If you had like a pool or something like below, you could just like basically create goggles for it.
That's true, yeah. So you could like set like a goggle kind of thing in there. That'd be cool. These are great.
Sounds like we need workshop version 2. That's just
We definitely need workshop version 2.
Speaking on that beetle example, what's the effective like focal range of that camera? Because especially right now since it's just that vertical thing. If you want to turn 90 degrees, is there an option to actually like modify the camera so it has a wider range, just so it captures more on the ground?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. If I look at a photo, I have the thing right here. So we basically turn this. This is like a tackle box, like a waterproof box people carry on stuff. We turn it into kind of a waterproof camera, and we just have a 55 millimeter lens mount on it. So I've hooked up just like lens adapters that did like more of like a wider angle lens and screwed that on there. So that's one option. You could have a different lens. And so if you needed to stay the same distance but a wider view, you can do that. The other thing you can do is just the arms. They are designed so that, remember, each arm is 2 arms, but each arm can also slide and then extend itself. And then you use the same bolts to make the arm longer, or you can go even longer if you want. So there's a couple different distances you can change it for, and it automatically runs a calibration every 6 minutes. You can control this if you want, but to adjust to whatever distance things are away. So yeah, you can. We even have one option when it's about like choosing your target. We have like single size target, double size target, quad size target, or point it at something. So you don't even have to put the arms on. If you have some other way of like holding it up or something like that, you can put it however you want.
Turn the light on.
Huh?
Is your light on? Turn the light on.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that conversely, could this system also be adapted to look for like birds if you point to a sky or at least a certain area? Or canopy of trees, just for instance.
Again, it like depends. If you have things that are existing pretty consistently in a certain plane, you can point it at it. So I just manually turn it on. It's going to start lighting up and blinding everyone in just a second, but it'll take a second to do its little first startup.
So it's thinking.
It's thinking, exactly. It's waking up. It's been a little
How
sleepy.
many did you make?
We've got about 30 that we've made in the world.
Oh, in the world. Like
This past week, we made like 6, or a week yesterday. It's been a week already. But yeah, so like for instance, another friend at the Smithsonian had me actually just convert the insides of one of these to a 96 well plate reader. He grows fungus in different wells, and he just needed a really high resolution thing to like basically take a time lapse of this fungus growing. And then we have little QR codes next to all the wells, and so we can localize each little hole and then see how much light is coming through to kind of measure the fungal growth. Oh, you know what? It didn't turn on because we had the inhibition switch on. Nice. So our inhibition switch is working. We have like a safety that you can put on. Yes, exactly. Surprisingly, TSA does not care about these things. Not at all. It's been surprising.
these home in an airplane
Yes.
and they're not going to take it away?
Not at all. I've flown all over the place with them.
Wow.
Yeah. We chose this battery because this is the largest battery you can fly with without the TSA getting grumpy at you. People use it for CPAP machines. So they're like a common battery that people travel with that's also quite big. So yeah, hopefully this guy should turn on.
What's the battery capacity?
Battery capacity is 182. I forget if that was measured in watt hours or amp hours. 182 somethings. It's the Talent Cell PB2412. Yay, it turned on. It's very bright. Hey, it got even brighter. And Jeanette's not even seeing it.
What? Oh my
There you go,
God.
it's bright.
That's amazing.
So you can see
Super bright.
it has the attractor light on right now. There's a UV side and a visible light side. So you can mix or switch those. And then the big ring lights are usually used for photography. So they're kind of like a photography flash. When it was holding the ring lights on for a while, that was because it was doing a calibration. So normally it'll just do like a quick like every photo. But it was adjusting for me swinging around wildly.
That's great.
Thank you.
Do the UV lights stay on while it's taking pictures?
They do. You could also turn them off, but I've just left them on. Yeah. And it's interesting, this glass that we have there is actually technically a UV filter. So in theory, it filters it right back out of what the lens is seeing. But hold it up.
Wow, that's
Thanks. Yeah.
It's going to be hard to pin into a question, but generally, where do you think the sort of intersection curve of time and effort and resources lies when you're thinking through the design of a system like this in terms of whether or not it's best to put it together with off-the-shelf things versus going with a system that's fully integrated and manufacturable, like a GLC PCB or something like that, so maybe smaller. And anyways, hopefully that.
Perfect. We're exactly at the inflection point of that curve right now. So right now, everything about the Mothbox is optimized for, I want to do this right now, and this doesn't exist, and I can't just buy a Mothbox, but I can buy off-the-shelf parts that are common around the world. That's the reason that the big ring lights, those are scientific ring lights that seem to be quite ubiquitously designed. They're 12 volts, they're really bright, they're cheap, they're 15 to 20 bucks, and they're all 144 LEDs, and they're the same size. I can find those in the UK and Panama and the US. And so we try to design things around off-the-shelf parts. The downside to doing that is we spend, and if you're learning, you spend about a day hacking into like these lights and putting things together. Things are a little bulkier. Things are probably a little expensive. All the parts, just like off the shelf, are about 400 bucks right now. But like most of that's just like the cameras, like 70 bucks. The Raspberry Pi is like 60. The battery is like $100 itself. So it's still very inexpensive compared to a lot of things. But if we want to, and this is pretty great for like, hey, this type of data and this workflow doesn't exist, and we want to build like 30, 50 of these things and get them to people. And we want people who aren't us to be able to completely make it autonomously themselves. So that's good what that's designed for. But we get a lot of people being like, oh, this is great. Can I just buy like 5 of them? And I can be like, yes, but if I actually like charged you my engineering time with it, maybe then it would be, several $1,000s or something like that. And so I'm usually like, you can buy all the parts and then put it together. Or you can fly an Andy in for a workshop and we can show everyone how to put them together. Yeah, thanks. Sponsor glad.
Pay for it.
And so,
paying you for this workshop?
well, I wouldn't say paying me, but they provided support to help get me here, and volunteer fun time to help do workshops. And so there's a lot of love fueling a lot of things. But the other side is, if we want to do this, if we want to have thousands or tens of thousands of these Mothboxes out in the world, it's cool to have this DIY thing that's entirely just off-the-shelf parts, but there might be something in between that's a little more manufacturable. For instance, if we made like a big PCB that has all the lights integrated on it, it has the UV lights and the other lights, and maybe the camera's in there, and people can just buy that for like $250, and then buy a Raspberry Pi, clip it on, something like that. That might be a way that it can be produced much more quickly, less intensive for everybody who has to manufacture it themselves, and it could even get like smaller. But the problem is that that's a whole different design route to take. And also doing that leaves it less open for a lot of the questions we've had to answer along the way. of like when we were building this, we didn't even know like, you know, what kind of schedule it's going to run for. Is this a thing that it needs to have a humongous battery because it runs every single night, or it runs only once a night? Part of the reason it's small now is because it went from a big thing, because we were looking at the existing designs, to this group we worked with was like, we wanted a drone to pick it up. And I'm like, oh no, this is going to be hard. But you know, that helped really drastically change the size. And so this was really good for figuring out this kind of play space of what this device needs to do or what it should do. And then basically, if we get new funding, there'll probably be another branch that tries to work on a more mass manufacturable Mothbox. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
What's a deployment schedule for these look like? Is it, you know, put it out for an evening? Is it put it out for days?
Usually it's you put it out for a couple days. So I would say the most typical thing, now that we're just trying to get a bunch of data, is we have some field assistants working with Hubert, who are like going out and they're like, okay, I'm setting up this camera trap, I'm collecting some soil samples. By the way, now that I'm out here, I'm gonna hang up this Mothbox. And usually it's set to turn on every night at like 7 p.m. and then run for about 5 hours every other hour. It turns off usually every other hour to help kind of cleanse the palette, so the bugs kind of fly away and we get kind of new bugs. But then, and it usually runs for 3 to 4 days, just kind of on its own. And then usually they'll pick it up maybe the next week or the week after that, grab it from the field where it's dead, charge it up, and then go deploy it again. But there's a couple more special times where we were like, okay, we want to set this thing up over here, we want to set this thing up over here, but it takes like a day to get over here and a day to go over here, and we want them to collect simultaneous data, so then we can change the schedule around a little bit and be like, okay, both of you wait until Sunday and then turn on, and then we get like the same data, but from different, same time data, different spatial locations.
I was kind of curious. So, you know, if you put these out in the rainforest and there's nobody around, that's great. But, you know, a lot of us are interested in what's happening with, you know, different human-based, you know, degradation of forests and stuff.
Yeah.
So just start putting these things in places where there might be other humans. Have you encountered problems with people stealing them or vandalizing them or something like that?
So we've been, this is something we didn't realize until like the first time we like went to like a big public forest. Because like in our minds, and again, this is what I mean when like, it's really necessary to field test things, because you have all these assumptions going on in your brain that you don't even think about until you're actually confronted with it. And the main assumption was just like, oh, it's a camera trap, but for insects. People put camera traps out in the forest, and like, you know, you put like chain them up or something like that. Usually people let them alone or don't really notice them. We do the same thing with that. But then you're like out in the forest, you're setting it up and you're like, oh wait, this thing lights up the whole forest. It's the opposite of camouflaged. It is a giant, like you can see it, I've seen it from a kilometer away, just like in the jungle, because I could just see like a glowing, like far away, and it's like, oh, this is gonna attract people. But so far, we've been pretty lucky. Nobody's messed with any of them, and part of that I was worried like maybe. Because we'll put like a little chain on it like you do with a lot of camera traps, a little like bike lock kind of thing. Huh?
They might think it's a bomb. Stay away.
We had one, there was a private reserve that one got put on, and it got the security called on it. They're like, there's a mysterious device lighting up. Like, what is this? And but that was it. Other than that, we haven't noticed any just like random folks doing anything with it. I'm worried someone might see it and, you know, just be like, oh, it's bright, I'm gonna kick it, or something like that. So I don't really know the answer yet, but it is a different ball game than regular camera traps because it's bright and shiny. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious because you had mentioned, I mean, obviously, you know, there's the conservation theme throughout the stuff that you're doing, and you had mentioned the recycling and upcycling that you're doing.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, sort of, if there's anything, like, as you develop something like this, obviously there's a lot of waste that goes in if you've gone from version 1 to version 4.5. Are there any things that you've done or found that are like really helpful in sort of that rapid iteration that still, helps you feel good at the end of the day about like, oh man, I've used all this acrylic, what do I do with it now?
Totally. So one of the main things is we primarily prototype with cardboard. And so, again, building the things flat, before we ever start cutting really nice, fancy plastic, we generally like cut everything out with cardboard and be like, oh, okay, cool, this fits, or like, oh no, this doesn't, this needs to be wider, or oh, if I put this here, this thing can't go there anymore. And so there was like, I probably went through per iteration maybe like 15 cardboard moth boxes before I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna go plastic. Then sometimes we'll, if it doesn't need to be like ultra precise plastic and I'm still kind of messing around, we make plastic sheets out of melted garbage. So a lot of type 4 plastic. I have a panini press. I have baking sheets, Teflon baking sheets. Put the plastic between the sheets, squish it down, melt, let it cool, then laser cut that, do whatever you need, saw it, jigsaw it, whatever. We've also been, when we do have to use the acrylic, it has a long tail of getting used again. So like, there's been a bunch of old targets that were like this, that then, there was something wrong with the design. So like V2's targets all got turned into like the lens parts for another one. So then we do those scraps. And then you get little bits left over, and you can cut out smaller pieces. And then when you get even smaller, we have a shredder. So we have a big plastic shredder named Terry La Trituradora. And Terry chews up all this acrylic, and you get this beautiful, sparkly stuff. And recently, you can heat press it, or we put it in a big box with a bunch of acetone, and then melt it in a kind of like geode-looking thing of plastic. And that's usually too irregular to make like some scientific tools with, but we make keychains that we then sell for the animal rescue. So yeah, we're and sometimes people are like, oh, you're recycling so you can save the world. Like, no, like if you want to help the world, like stop one company from dumping like one truck full of horrible things into the ocean. But it does make you just feel better to just not consume extra stuff and use what you have on hand. Yeah. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.